Hey, hope you guys been doing well. This is Jeff here. Today, I want to talk about the current state of the entry level software engineering job market as of the end of 2024. Exactly 1 year ago, I made a similar video, and my video was based off of the analytics from Hired.com during that period of time, and also blending in my own personal experience with working with entry level folks as a mentor and seeing them apply to 5,000 plus, if not more jobs, and seeing their progression and trying to land a job during that period of time, which they both did. It's been exactly a year since I made that video, and I feel like it's a great time to be able to make a secondary video, which is going to be this one, talking about the current state now. Just like last year, interestingly, I used the Hired.com analytics, but this year they didn't seem to have published any sort of analytics. Take that for what it is, but fortunately for myself, I was actually able to work with quite a bit more folks day in and day out on their job search process. I work with a lot of folks, probably around 10 to 15 folks throughout the year on a one-on-one basis, hearing about their experience day in, day out. Some of them went to top tier schools, some of them went to mid-tier schools, that kind of stuff, average colleges, CS degrees, boot camps. And then I also worked with a couple mid-level to senior level folks, also progressed through the job experience throughout the year. And so all in all, these folks probably applied to several thousand jobs, if not more, maybe 10,000 applications. Of course, I wasn't the person to see them through and guide them through every single job application, but I got a lot of updates throughout the year and was able to provide a little bit of guidance and direction as the year progressed. I find that I have an interesting experience in this topic. And for myself, being a staff software engineer at a major tech company, I've also seen the progressions and the growth at my own company, and also hearing it from the folks in Silicon Valley, which is where I'm located. And so I hope you guys enjoy this one. I'm actually going to break this one in three parts. It'd be great to be able to talk about where we are at currently, but I think it's going to be good to talk about a little bit of a timeline from the beginning of the year all the way to the end process now. And then, of course, I'll talk about my takes on what will happen moving forward, my kind of opinion, just personal opinion on this. And I hope you guys enjoy this. Before I begin, right, this is solely an opinion on my own. It seems like there's even less analytics out this year. Take that for what it is. So this one is even a little bit more opinionated from my personal experience. So I hope you guys find this helpful. And if you want me to dive into any of the topics specifically, I'd happy be to do so. Here we go. Okay, so first to start with the beginning of the year. Beginning of the year was definitely a difficult time. We didn't see a lot of great outcomes. A lot of folks were really having a hard time being able to even get an interview in the first place, especially at the entry level. And I think a couple things were to blame there, right? At that time, there were still the major layoffs that were making the news. A lot of companies weren't opening up recs. And even the folks that we did see that were landing those positions, they were more focused on the non-core tech businesses. For example, like in medical fields or like joining a retail company or something that wasn't like a Google or that kind of thing, right? Not to say that there wasn't job openings for those positions. There definitely were a couple, but those seemed to be extremely difficult interviews to come by. And on top of that, the general consensus for technical interviewing overall during that period of time seemed to be incredibly difficult. Just from seeing the folks talk about their experiences, like there was many cases where I personally felt like they should have gotten through on a lot of the interviews, but they didn't get through. And like for some of them, I was even absolutely mind blown and seeing, okay, this person has done their homework. They seem to have gotten that question right, but unfortunately, it still wasn't a match. And it seemed like there was like this pain point in even trying to get onto the onsite. And I see that in the reason why I personally think that was the case is for two main reasons. I think that for the job openings that were open, they were usually for mission critical or teams that had allocated budget, right? So higher priority teams at the big tech companies. And if it wasn't a big tech company, if it was somewhere outside of the realm of that, working in big retail like a Target or Home Depot or something like that, it seemed that those job positionings were still, the difficulty and competition of those were still high. It seemed like two main things, in my opinion, were happening, right? At the big tech companies that were just doing the layoffs. It's not that they had a dead stop on hiring. It's that they had a very large slowdown in hiring, and a lot of the positions were extremely competitive, and the bar seemed to be fairly high to get into one of those. And then on the opposite spectrum, it seemed like non-tech companies still had their recs open, and you had a much higher probability to get an interview in those realms, although for the lower pay and benefits, that kind of stuff. But it seemed like a lot of folks that were in those positions that got laid off at like the Googles, that kind of stuff, were now looking and competing in the same realm for those positions as well. And it's this odd kind of scenario. And to be honest, right, if you were interviewing during that time, you were definitely playing at max level difficulty, legendary mode, and it was hard to be able to get around that. And one other sign that I felt where it was really difficult too was that at that point, as a staff engineer, even for experience hiring, I nearly got no reach out, which usually, even for experience hiring, you'd get a trickle down of like weekly reach out from at least 3, 4, 5 companies, startups to big companies, that kind of thing. And so that was definitely a difficult time. Okay, so that was the beginning of the year. Now on to like the middle of the year. Middle of the year, we actually saw tons of changes, right? We did see a lot of the recs open up. Not a lot, but we did see some recs open up for the top tier companies. They were mainly like on-site or hybrid. However, even though we saw those open up, we still personally think that the level of the technical interview was still fairly high. And unfortunately, even some of the folks that grinded through the LeetCode experience had a difficult time landing at one of those positions. But this period of time, the conversation started to shift a little bit, right? The conversation shifted from, hey, I'm applying to 1,000 jobs, 500 jobs, and nobody will even reply to me. So, hey, I applied to 500 and I've gotten 3 or 4 technical assessments. So at least there was some options involved, but I would say the difficulty, in my opinion, was still very high, with just a slight ease off the gas. I mean, I would say if the difficulty during the beginning year was a 10 out of 10, I would say the middle of the year was probably an 8 out of 10 in difficulty. Whereas like maybe in COVID, I would say maybe it was probably like a 5 out of 10, something like that difficulty. Okay, so to conclude the middle of the year kind of job search, in my opinion, a lot of those folks that I was working with that were grinding it out from the end of last year, like that October, December, November time, all the way up to the beginning of the year, most of the folks I was working with did end up actually landing a job during this middle of the year, like summertimey time period. And definitely seemed like a lot of folks' story, in my opinion, was having a really long 8-month or so job search, somewhere around there, 6 months, 8 months, and then finally being able to benefit from the market kind of cooling off at least slightly from the difficulty of interviews and having some of those hybrid positions open up for them. Okay, so finally brings that to today's current day, the last couple months, how things have been doing. In my opinion, this might be controversial, but I actually think that there was another uptick of positivity and a little bit more hope in the job application process. From what we see is that there has been another increase of kind of job recs opening up. We're noticing that even the companies that did the layoffs immediately turned around and rehired positions at their company. In my opinion, that's a decent sign. And so we're noticing that folks right now, they're having a decent time finding the interviews. They're no longer having to grind through 1,000 job applications to be able to get 1 interview or 500 applications to get 2 interviews. It seems like the ratio has eased up quite a bit. And job recs, even in tier 1 locations like San Francisco, New York, that kind of thing, have actually opened up slightly as well. And my kind of caution to this, right, is that although they have opened up, I would say that, of course, they're nowhere near the levels of mid-COVID time period. And so overall, still extremely difficult, right? I think on the scale, maybe it's moved down 1 point, maybe half a point. And also we've noticed that some of the LeetCode and technical interviews have actually eased up quite a bit as well. In fact, we saw someone be able to land a job, 1 offer, or 1 interview, 1 job, which like probably was unheard of 8 months ago, 10 months ago. And so there has been good signs, and pretty much every single person I'm working with a decent strategy has had done multiple interviews, anything from doing the on-site to getting like the technical assessments, that kind of thing, even in the tier 1 location. So there is a little bit of good insight, and of course, getting the interview is just the first step. It's really great being able to see some of the folks being able to have that ease off on the technical bar to be able to get through. Again, to conclude the exact state that we currently are at, it definitely has eased off from the beginning of the year, but I would say it's no cakewalk easy. I think that almost every single week, folks are still reaching out, having a hard time landing a job. But overall, the conversation has shifted. I've seen the momentum shift from not being able to get interviews to getting interviews, but just having a hard time going through the grind and trying to land something. Another thing is that also having a shift in conversation, right? Now I'm having a lot more conversations about doing the interview, going through the interview process, rather than just simply like the strategies and tactics to just grind away at applying to jobs. Definitely a little bit of a momentum shift as well. As I mentioned before, I think that we're still at a hard difficulty being able to land a software job, especially an entry-level software job, rather than the legendary max difficulty all-time high from the beginning of the year to the end of last year. Lastly, the last thing I want to add about the current time period too, another great insight that I have for myself is being a staff engineer, right? It's the first time I got reached out to from all the major tech companies in the last month or so. So that tells me that experience level hiring for the first time in a really long time is actually now currently doing some outreach. That's also another good sign as well. And nowhere near where we were in COVID, where experience level hiring was getting 3 recruiter emails a day in my inbox. Now I'm probably getting maybe 2 a week, 1 a week, something like that, from startups to big companies to just the general folks that are doing active reach out. And so that's another good sign in my opinion. Okay, so to conclude this video off, I think that there's a lot of interesting things that are happening right now, right? I would be hesitant to say, and I think that I would be very incorrect to say that the job market is back, or like it's officially software engineering is back. I would definitely not say that in any ways, but I would say that it is very possible to still be able to land an entry-level job. Currently, it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of applying, but nowhere near impossible, which it was probably 10 months ago. Looking forward, looking ahead in the next couple months or so, I think things are going to be okay. They're going to, in my opinion, I don't think they'll necessarily improve and get better, but I see more of a leveling of being able to sustain the current rate right now, mainly because the interest rates are going back down slightly. And then also companies, more importantly, in my opinion, I think companies are hit at a point where they're hitting the point of where they're getting on the good side of shareholders. And so overall, I think those are good signs. I can see in Q1 next year, I can see them continuing to open up recs for the team, but I wouldn't say that they're gonna, I wouldn't say that companies are at a point where they're willing to open up positions for like non-mission critical teams quite yet. So overall, my guess is as good as yours. I think there's a lot of good signs that it's getting better. But overall, right, I don't think that the better is necessarily as good as it was post-COVID, and especially it'll probably never get back to the point where it was as easy to get a job during like the mid-COVID time period. At the end, right now, if you're currently looking for a job, I personally think that it's still going to be a difficult, hard grind, but there is hope. I do think that folks are landing jobs, they're finding some success, and some folks are even landing those top tier company jobs and being one of the first in a really long span of time period where we didn't see a lot of folks entering in at the Googles and Amazons and that kind of thing. And so I think there is a little bit of positivity here at this current state. Okay, so I hope that was helpful. I hope that even made sense. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, I'll talk to you on the next one. Latest.